from Ukrainian and Russian authorities and for the related potential misidentification of civil aircraft. United States flight operations are prohibited until further notice in the airspace over Crimea, the Black Sea, and the Sea of Azov.
And that's exactly for these sorts of reasons. I'm not sure whether that NOTAM was still, that restriction had been widened or narrowed to account for where this is, which of course is further up into Ukraine than the Crimea further south, so this might not be within that area. And anyway, it's not a US carrier, but even so, this is a clear indication of the dangers that were known about, but nobody ever realistically thought that a civil aircraft at 32,000 feet with a profile and a flight plan would be at risk or at danger in such a way.
Also, this now from Russia, the Russian president's website. The Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, informed the President of the United States of a message which arrived just before the phone call from air traffic control about a Malaysian airplane crash over Ukrainian territory. Again, the key question, where did this missile come from? Oh, who fired it and with what intent? Michelle Kosinski is at the White House. Michelle, what are you hearing?
From the Kremlin. I mean, they usually have a readout of these phone calls as well as the White House. So far, there's no more information from the White House, though. We thought it was interesting, though, that this phone call happened this morning. I mean, this was a call initiated by the Kremlin. It was supposed to be about the sanctions that the U.S. just imposed on Russia. But now there are these questions about whether this was discussed. So what the White House is saying at this point is that they're not sure of the timing exactly. The press secretary is still trying to gather the details on what exactly was talked about with Vladimir Putin in that phone call. But, you know, over the last few weeks, we haven't heard much. I mean, there's been so much domestically that the White House has contended with that from a news perspective, we haven't been hearing much day to day on the Ukraine situation from the White House. So several weeks ago, there was a background briefing on the situation there on the ground. Didn't really make headlines. Well, we found it to be shocking and interesting, the volume of weaponry moving over the border that the U.S. and other Western governments believed was still continuing, and in some cases even escalating. I mean, at the time, they were talking mostly about tanks. I don't think there was much discussed. And right now, the White House isn't giving us any more information on their perspective of what they believed in terms of missiles or any surface-to-air capability flowing over the border. Mostly ammunition and tanks. At least that's what they were talking about publicly at the time. Again, this was in the last few weeks. But consistently throughout the months of this crisis and the U.S.'s involvement from afar, one thing that has been on the minds of officials here and in allied governments was the broader security threat. I mean, this particular situation or something like this, a plane being shot down, was never mentioned. Nothing specific like that. But in terms of the broader security situation, you mentioned the FAA warning prohibiting U.S. planes from flying over Crimea and the Black Sea. Yes, something like this has been a concern. I mean, when we talk security threat of Russia moving in and arming rebels, it's mostly in terms of our allies on the border region. What would Putin do? That's been the real question. But when you get deeper and deeper into the information that the U.S. has gathered about the movement of weaponry, about the rebels and how they've been, in the view of the West, armed and controlled by Russia, then yes, a broader security threat to civilians beyond these borders has been a big concern.
Michelle Kosinski reporting from the White House. We will check in with you shortly. I want to go to our Jim Shudo, also in Washington, who's been hearing from the Malaysian government. Jim, what are you hearing from them now?
Well, the Malaysian government has just tweeted. I think we're going to put the tweet up on the screen now so our viewers can see it, if we have that. And here it is. I am shocked by reports that an MH, that's Malaysian Airlines plane, crashed. We are launching an immediate investigation. And just an incredible tragedy for Malaysia, for the airline, for the Malaysian people, so soon after the loss, of course, of MH370. And social media also putting out another interesting tweet. Anderson, when you and I spoke earlier, I spoke about how a Ukrainian separatist, pro-Russian separatist leader claimed to have shot down a Ukrainian plane around the same time that this Malaysian plane disappeared. And I just want to quote from a tweet that this separatist leader sent out around that time. A warning as such, we warned, do not fly in our skies. You know, as a plane went down, he referred to it as a bird fall. Apparently, this plane, this Malaysian jet, which he thought was a Ukrainian military plane or a Ukrainian jet of some kind, as it went down, he tweeted out, "We warned, do not fly in our skies." This is something that you and I spoke about a short time ago, Anderson. The Ukrainian officials had told me that around the same time that this Malaysian jet disappeared, that pro-Russian separatists, that a pro-Russian separatist leader claimed to have shot down a Ukrainian military plane, and that we now have what he said at the time that that plane was shot down, this warning in effect, and this claiming of credit as this plane went to the ground that he apparently thought was Ukrainian.
I want to bring in our Jill Doherty, former Moscow bureau chief for CNN. I was with Jill in Kiev, in Ukraine, just several months ago at the height of this crisis.
No, just say former CNN.
Jill, this is Anderson. Can you hear me?
Hey, Anderson.
Hey, Jill, you're on the air. In terms of the likelihood of Russian forces having been involved in this, what do you make of this? Because obviously there has been an increase of Russian forces along this border, according to Ukrainian authorities, more than 10,000 or so right now along this border.
Well, that would be a very, very serious step if they did do that. I think the question is, you know, the capability and what, at this point, the rebels have as opposed to the Russian forces. Because if this is a well-known path where planes fly, the Russian military would be very well aware of that. That said, according to the experts that we've been having on air, there was only one way that could happen if you had some major weaponry to be able to bring that down. But at this point, I think the most intriguing thing is that boast by the separatist leader Storkov on social media that they shot down roughly an hour before, apparently, the Malaysian flight went down, that they shot down the plane. And the question is raised, of course, did they accidentally or inadvertently hit the wrong plane? And that, I think, is the hardest lead at this point as to what might have happened. It seems dubious that the Russian military, in other words, would want to take down a major passenger plane.
Certainly, with not the intent of taking down, whether again, we simply don't know who brought this down. I'm also here with Lieutenant Colonel Rick Francona. Again, just in terms of capabilities, though, we have not seen separatists heretofore able to bring down a plane at this kind of an altitude. They have brought down two Ukrainian transport planes, or at least one transport plane, two Ukrainian military planes earlier, but they were not flying at 33,000 feet.
Right, yeah, this would require, as we're talking about, a more sophisticated system. Talking about, you know, hitting it inadvertently, it would be very, very difficult for that to happen. Generally, once you're locked onto the target, it goes to that target, and if it veers off of that target and is no longer being guided, they self-destruct.
But when you're targeting a plane at that altitude, are you clear on exactly what kind of a plane it is?
You would no. It's a return on your radar.
Right.
So it'll be a certain size. You can estimate the size of the aircraft. You may have other sensors that tell you what it is. But you know, once you're getting radar returns and you engage the weapon, it just follows the radar path right up to the aircraft.
To Bob Baer's earlier point that this is all trackable, that we will soon know where this missile, if that in fact is what it was fired from. Do you believe that?
If we have the right sensors in the right place at the right time,
right, if
yes.
you were monitoring,
yeah, if you were looking for it, you know, the radar signals can be intercepted. You can analyze those after the fact. You can even sometimes detect the launch of the missile. But your sensors have to be aimed at that spot at that time. And
do we know if Ukrainian government, which, I mean, their military capabilities have come under a huge amount of questions over the last couple of months, so they have improved lately, whether they would have the capabilities of monitoring that area?
The Ukrainian armed forces would be able to detect the radars. That's very easy to do.
So they should be able to, whether one believes them or not, but they should be able to identify where this
they should be able to not only identify where, they should be able to tell us what kind of radar it was. There would be multiple radar signals. There'd be a search radar. There would be an acquisition radar. There'd be a guidance radar. So they should be able to determine all of that. if they have that information, that surely indicates a launch of a weapon and that this was a shoot down. Absent that, we don't know. Was this an onboard explosion? Was it hit with something?
There's other questions also about command and control of a device like that, over who exactly would make such a call to actually fire that kind of a weapon, how organized command and control it is.
The Russian air defense, when they move, they're all networked together, and someone is in charge. Now, if this is a division asset, the division commander, of course, will make that decision. But if, as Bob was saying, if they were provided to the separatists, and I think that would be a remote possibility. You know, the systems are self-contained. Once you've got the radar system and the missile system, and you've got it up and running,
Someone locally can do it. It's not a centralized command from.
Would not have to be controlled, say, at a filter center upward in the chain of command.
But again, you believe the likelihood that any of these separatist groups that we have seen operate